What I'd like to do in this short video is to briefly run through the introduction of replication into the teaching of quants via the use of resources available on the Economics Network's Ideas Bank. Now, what I find is that these are really useful for introducing a form of flipping into teaching, and in particular picking up on the distinction between perhaps more restricted forms of flipping where students are asked to read material outside of class or work through solutions, exercises, and produce solutions to various things that are then discussed within the classroom. Instead, via these resources, I think you can be a little more ambitious in what you do and introduce flipping in a more general or experimental form. So what I'm going to look at are two particular sorts of resources that are available on the website. There's the more self-contained empirical work, so the sorts of resources where it talks through a particular topic, provides a worked example and a data set, and also talk about some more interactive tools which I think allow students to experiment outside of class and get a broader, deeper understanding of particular topics you're covering. Now, if I go to the Ideas Bank, as you can see, the Economics Network provides a whole collection of different resources here. And the sorts of things I make use of are firstly these more empirical based studies, so things like this where it's running through causality, it provides information about the types of tests that are used, says something about how the approach to analysis is undertaken, provides a worked empirical example, gives you the data set. Students can then go off and attempt to reproduce these results and see whether their understanding matches the discussion presented in the resource, in the particular case study on the Ideas Bank. And this is one for causality. There's other ones on the Economics Network website that talk through things to do with forecasting. So here it's an example of something working through exponential smoothing, looking at Holt's linear approach, and then single exponential smoothing. And in both cases there are data sets provided, so there's a eViews file there. For the later example, there's going to be a Excel file somewhere. There it is. And students can download the data, read the discussion provided, attempt to replicate the results. I think they're very useful. They give students a target to work towards. It allows them to do something outside of class that tests their understanding of the material. But the other sorts of resource that I'm interested in and make use of are these more interactive tools. And there's a couple of examples here on the website. There's one on forecast combination, and there's one on forecast evaluation. And in both cases, these case studies on the Ideas Bank provide material that explains the particular topic that's being examined, provides some quantitative output that can be considered, but in both cases also provides these interactive worksheets. So for forecast combination, you've got the following. You can ask students to play about with different inputs and then see how those inputs change the resulting outputs. So these are quite experimental in nature. Students aren't restricted to considering a particular kind of reading or a particular set of exercises. They can experiment quite broadly with the topic. And again, for this other case study, there's an example where students can input their own data. So they can put in different sets of forecasts, different values for an actual series that is being forecast, and they can look at how those different inputs change the resulting outputs, the values for different forecast evaluation statistics. So these are just a couple of examples of what's available. As I say, I find these particularly useful for flipping because with these interactive tools in particular, students can be left to experiment and consider different issues in relation to the topics you're covering rather than being restricted to a particular form of analysis or understanding.